Welcome into Cannabis Conversations, episode number 3. If you've watched the first 2 episodes, you see that I have access to some of the baddest dudes in the industry. That continues today with someone that I have nicknamed since I met him, the Marlboro Man, because I believe that his brand, Lobo Canager, is something that is going to be overarching in our industry. You're going to hear about it no matter where you go, no matter what state legalizes, who does it. You're going to be looking for the Lobo brand. You've probably already indulged in the Lobo brand. You don't even know it. That's the beauty of my man, Aaron Raskin. Aaron, how are you today, man?
I'm good. Thank you, Sean. That's a great intro.
I'm happy to have you, man. I really am. I'm so fortunate. Obviously, you and I connected a while back. People who don't know this, I'm a small lender in the space of cannabis. I try to be fair. I try to connect with great folks. And Aaron is one of those great folks. He and I have done a couple projects together. We have had some fun success, and I look forward to more of it in the future. So, Aaron, we like to kick the shows off with a little bit of background. So why don't you tell us the Aaron Cannabis origin story?
Oh, wow. I mean, that goes way back. I mean, origin with myself to cannabis, as you know, as early, probably too early now, given the rules and regs, but I remember my first normal march in DC when I was like 14 or so, 15 or so. And I remember walking by a bunch of cops and smoking a joint in public, because that's what you did. You got to do that at normal rallies, right? And so I thought I was the coolest fucking little shit. And then so I literally walked past them, puffed, blew it out, and then walked straight into a stop sign. And these dudes just laughed their asses off. That's like probably my earliest memory that I could share. But lifelong passion for the plant, and really, living on the East Coast, I just watched as California and all these other markets first dabbled in this medical and Prop 215, and then rec started popping out as well. And it just seemed like, my whole life I'd wanted to be involved with this plant and promoting this plant. And so I realized, if I at the time I lived in Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn most of my adult life. It was going to take maybe another 10 years for it to become legal in New York. Because at that point, it was still like, if you were smoking weed in New York, even in the late 90s, when it was all cool in Cali, you still were kind of trying to find places to duck behind. You'd go down little stairwells with your homies, your buddy had a spot. So, that's where we were coming from. So I just, my trade, my background was always creating content. I did that in a number of different formats over the years. I did documentaries, socially conscious docs, nonprofit stuff. I did a lot of, ad stuff, and really had my own little ad shop for almost 2 decades. And ultimately that's what I knew. So I knew that, and I knew that I loved weed. I knew nothing about the business. And so I partnered with a guy named Eduardo Whittington, who was the number 3 of Puffco. Now, obviously, very well known brand of devices, and we set out to create a brand, and that's been the path that we've been on. That's the path that we are on, and it is a marathon, not a sprint. But there's been all these key moments along the timeline that have built to the point where we are now, which is still pushing it up that hill.
So I want to go back quickly. How do you end up at 15 at a normal rally? What's the genesis there? Is this family, friends? Is this an interest level? How do you end up at that rally at 15 years old?
So it was a 15. I got to figure out what year that was, but it was probably 15 or 16, with my homie from school who lived down around there. And I think it was maybe the night, maybe they even had it on the 4th of July, if I'm remembering correctly. And because I do remember the fireworks, but that could be 2 different nights. But yeah, so I think that was the setup. And it was really like, oh yeah, we're gonna go out there and be a part of this thing. Because we had read High Times magazine, we'd read all the different Ed Rosenthal grow books. So, we very much wanted to be a part of this culture. Which didn't, certainly at that age, but certainly at that time on that coast was very like, behind closed doors.
Yeah, it's that way, right? I'm in the Midwest, and it's kind of the same thing, right? Everything goes from the West over. Sometimes it skips the Midwest, goes right to the East. And you were talking about the ducking behind places, trying to find that quick smoke, and as kids in the country, we call them back roads, right? So we would go, there'd be a whole list of, county only roads. You knew the county cops wouldn't be back there. So you'd cruise, you'd find a spot in the woods, and that would be it. You'd chill for a couple and you'd get it done. I'm happy with the fact that I don't necessarily have to do that, but I think still, Aaron, there's still a little bit of that, right? Because public consumption still isn't necessarily legal, right? It isn't like you can walk down the street. I mean, you could probably in New York and no one would say anything. But when I was in Canada, pre-COVID, a buddy of mine picked us up and we were hanging out in Toronto, and he's like, oh, bro, here, smoke this joint. We were literally walking up on like 3 cops, and he hands me this joint, and I'm like, whoa, I don't. And he's like, no, seriously, this is totally legit. You're fine. And so lo and behold, we were legit. It was fine. He was like, you should blow it in his face. I'm like, whoa, dude, I'm not trying to be an asshole here. But it's crazy how different it is with that. When you were a kid, did you think that there would really be a time that you'd be able to do what we're doing today? When you were at 15 at the normal rally, did you have a vision of this? Because honestly, me as a 15-year-old, I always thought I was going to be, having to be behind closed doors.
So honestly, I was the guy that was always ranting about how it was going to eventually be legal. We were going to live in this utopia, right? But firstly, I don't know if I ever really had like a vision per se. Like, that was just a hunch.
A passion for the plant and a passion for the legalization, right?
Yeah, I was like, that was more of like a hope. But even now, fast forward, I would have never been able to guess it would be like it is right now, which is just, so fractured and strange and obviously transitional.
It is strange. And, now we're up to half the states almost with Ohio, right? We're here, we're fringing on this next level of discussion. But I think for me, it does come back to the passion for the plant, right? Is that I found it recreationally because I was, 14, 15. I found it recreationally. But when I turned 18 and was having massive migraines that were causing me to black out while driving, crazy shit, sitting through hours of testing, it turned out the only thing that helped me was cannabis. It wasn't the $1,000 worth of meds they wanted to put me on that tore my stomach apart or all this other shit. It was cannabis. And I remember telling a doctor downtown Chicago, head neurologist cat going, he's like, what do you do to deal with the pain? I'm like, well, I use cannabis. And he freaked out. He's like, you can't say that. We can't deal with that. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, this shit's a plant. So Aaron, in your experience with this, moving into it, how did you really become, obviously you're at the normal rally because you love the plant, but how did you start to see the value of the plant as it relates to the medicinal side of things? When did that happen for you?
Yes, it's interesting. I never thought about it that way, but I guess you're right. It started as a rec love, but then it was later in life, much later in life, actually, if I think about it. And the first time it was truly medicinal, right? Like, absolutely need this thing. It was actually hemp. It was a CBD hemp back in like 2019. I had a gnarly fall on the ice and had like a, proper brain injury of sorts with narcolepsy, you name it, right? Like all the crazy symptoms. And the only thing that made it all kind of like settle down and manageable was like straight up CBD hemp, right? Like no THC and definitely no alcohol. That was like poison.
Are you still a no alcohol guy, Aaron?
I'm down to like 1 to 2 beers a week kind of guy.
Yeah. I'm a casual, in the atmosphere, have a cocktail out at a meeting with a client or whatever, because I can't smoke a joint. So I got to have a drink, that sort of shit at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm the same way. Like I used to be bad, right? I was when I met my wife 20 years ago, I bought my first house when I was 19. I was a lay down drunk by 18. You know what I mean? And so when I met her, she wasn't into that. She was like, look, not my thing. Now, I met my wife because I was I don't know, what do you want to call it? A local supporter of the plant, potentially.
Right.
I was, you know what I mean? I was a local advocate of the plant. So that's how I met my wife. And I met a lot of people that way. But Aaron, dealing with the traumatic brain injury, I just want to touch back on this real fast. What made you go to CBD? Was it by accident? How do you sort of go to that? Was it an iteration? You've been through meds and said, hey, I got to try something different. How does one arrive there?
So maybe it's urban lore, but I believe the US government, in fact, has the patent for CBD as a neuroprotective cannabinoid, right? I've seen that before. I don't know if I've checked Snopes or anything, but I think that was in my head. And I think it was also just me like trying to find something because cannabis definitely fills a role during my day in terms of like productivity and focus and things like that, and not being able to consume it. I think maybe other people recommended it as well. I might have even dropped it on a WhatsApp or two, and people were like, you should try CBD. Which the sad thing is I had trashed CBD before this, right? I've been like, wait.
I was just gonna ask you, dude. Like, because people bring it to me all the time. Like, hey, CBD. I'm like, look, grow up, get high, smoke weed.
Yeah, right?
And so, but like,
no, 100%.
I know, but I shouldn't. I do the same thing about ecstasy. I'm like, look, if you want to trip, go trip. If you want to smoke weed, smoke weed. That thing in the middle is gonna kill your brain. But yeah, no, I'm hip to that. So what was your genesis for the dislike or hater version of it? What was it? Just the fact that it wasn't THC?
Yeah, I mean, when I tried it before, I was kind of like, it's like just, not scratching that itch, yada, yada.
Yeah.
I also think the quality of the CBD from when the Farm Bill became legal in 2018, right? Or when the Farm Bill made it legal, to even just a year later went up so dramatically as like greenhouse and indoor came online that what I had smoked in 2017, 2018 was probably garbage compared to what came out later.
Yeah, because then you diversified your business model into that, if I'm not mistaken, right? So
after my experience with it, yeah, literally, that's what it's like I came to Jesus. Like literally, I was just like, yo, this stuff is the bomb. Everybody needs to smoke this stuff. And then so I was on a tear. I mean, we had a whole shop devoted to just making hemp products. We sold it on Amazon before Amazon was really wise to what hemp was. And, had properly set up their little bots to eradicate it. And so, yeah, I look, full convert.
Yeah, full convert. And there's nothing worse than the recently converted, isn't that right? So then you go telling everyone how great it is and how they can't, right? Like when I quit smoking, I was the world's biggest asshole. I'm like, quit doing that. It's gross. I don't smoke cigarettes anymore. So it was easy for me to say it. Aaron, when you look at the way it's set up now, with this sort of, as you mentioned earlier, fracture, right? So we have this idea of, yeah, you can have hemp. See, I'm in Wisconsin, right? We have some of the most fertile ground in the world here. We grow some of the biggest, baddest crops. Our problem is we grew a bunch of hemp and then realized that it wasn't just a usable product, right? There was no one to mill it. There was no one to clean it up. There was no one to work through it. And then you have a bunch of these hemp farmers who are corn guys turned hemp farmers all fall off because they grew a bunch of shit that no one could do anything with and it went to waste. When you look at how we are positioned right now in the space, what needs to happen in your estimation to have hemp become, more, I don't want to say acceptable, but like more mainstream? We'll get to the THC mainstream, but or do you think it's already there?
I mean, I think it's already there, honestly. When you have all these DTC brands putting these ads up on Instagram, you know what I mean? Like they don't go through any of the level of censorship or scrutiny. So I kind of feel like they're out there. And really, I think there was like a wave of, CBD is going to be this big thing. And then the wave kind of came back because I think a lot of retailers started hearing like, yeah, customers buy it, but secretly they want to get high. Or maybe not so secretly. They want to have some head shift.
Yeah, some of the guys that I talk to about it are like, look, it's just I sold it once.
Yeah.
right? Those people didn't return. I didn't have people coming in every other week going, hey, I'll take another refill of my CBD, right? It was like, no, I'm good. But you have an interesting market weirdness where you live, because you have like the bodegas and like this legitimately illegal weed world that everyone is seemingly aware of, that you've shown me pictures of billboard trucks, for goodness sakes. How does this happen? How long, Aaron, has that existed within the space of New York? Obviously, when people talk OG, you always talk Northern Cali, the Emerald Triangle, etc. But this bodega thing, I go back to, some of my favorite weed shows back in the day with the bodega, and we all know it. But like, how long has that existed, and what does that look like today in your market, the way things are set up?
Yeah, New York's wild. So it's crazy, man. It's very confusing for the consumer. I will say that, right?
I agree. I saw a post from a guy you commented on a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was a couple of days ago, where he's like, yeah, my mom and I were shopping around all these places. And you're like, look, you were definitely in an illegal shop,
So here's the crazy thing, Shaw. So we actually drilled down into that in the DMs, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
So because the shop he was shopping at was not listed on the OCM's website for licensed shops. So I just concluded, like, oh, I think you went to I'm not mad at him. I just
want to give you a heads up, bro. You didn't go where you thought you went. You took your mom somewhere illegal. That's all.
Yeah, exactly. But anywho, yeah, turns out it's even more complicated than that. That they were using a workaround, which again, I'm not mad at, but they were essentially doing a cannabis grower showcase in what will eventually be a licensed storefront, but hasn't gotten approval yet. That's how complicated and wacky New York cannabis is. And that's on the compliance side. Everything I just described is compliant. It's just wacky.
So wait, hold on a second. So you're doing a pop-up shop.
Yes.
In a weed store that might become a weed store that you're still not guaranteed a weed store.
No, and because of that, that's why his menu was so small, because of the rules around Cannabis Growers Showcase. But to answer your original question, right? So people talk about the weed in the bodegas. And I always laugh, because back in the day, there still were bodegas you could buy weed in, right? Like there always have been in New York. It's just now it's run rampant. Like I even remember back in the 90s, you could go and they had the little cube, it would spin around, you said the right thing, and you could get like a dime bag.
Sure, yeah.
But they were like few and far between, and it was certainly not advertised all over them like some of these illegal dispos.
Yeah, but see here, dude, that's the thing, right? We heard those stories, right, from both coasts here in the Midwest that you could go there. So what we did was we went to our smoke shops where we were buying our glass pieces, and we would try the same shit, and literally we would get thrown out. People would be like, get out, you can't buy anything, leave here today. And you're like, well, no, hold on, I just, whatever. And so it's funny how we assume within our cultures that, like, yeah, if you got a smoke shop selling glass bowls and bongs, I could probably get a dime bag. Turns out I can't. So it runs rampant everywhere. With you, that was the 90s, you said. Jeez.
That was back in the 90s, but look, that now it's like that times 100, and they all have signage, and oftentimes they pose as a real dispensary. So I have had a lot of friends who've been like, oh, I go to this dispensary in Brooklyn. I'm like, no, you don't, because there's none. Like and the dispensary tells them, oh yeah, we're licensed, or oh, we're just waiting on our license.
Aaron, is it the same entry process? I grew up in the Colorado cannabis market as an adult, right? And so it was very fucking specific. Dudes with guns, people at fucking, at the Target with locked doors and licenses and bulletproof glass and shit at the beginning. Is it like that in these bodegas, or is it just like a convenience store, you just walk in like anybody else?
There's levels. So there's the bodegas, which are straight up, actually their main business is bodegas. They just happen to now sell weed. The ones that sell hookah pipes and kratom and you name it. So all good. That's one level. There's certainly no dude at the door checking your ID, but presumably they do on checkout. But who knows? But then there's the ones that look like real dispos, and they do check your ID at the door. And that's just like, again, that's where maybe it gets a little confusing for consumers, because it's like a built out dispensary.
Yeah, and we got Jeffrey Hoffman coming on the show here coming up, right? You know, cannabis attorney to the stars there in New York, and this is kind of some of the stuff that I'm looking forward to chatting with him about. Is what now? How does one get in the license game, feel comfortable about putting up the frontage on the license game, which is not pennies, it is a lot of money, and then can be outsourced or outdone by people who don't have to play the same game? Aaron, that's got to be legit concerns for people in that space, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really, really hurt the industry. But, at the end of the day, what did they expect New Yorkers were going to do when they made it legal, right, or decriminalized, and then didn't immediately issue a whole bunch of licenses and stores? There's like that pent up entrepreneurial, like,
Demand.
yes.
Fill the void, right? Like, hey, if everyone's here, I already know the legacy grower, so I'm good, and I'll go ahead and plug in, and I'll be ready to go.
Yeah, and it's New York City. Everybody pounces on an opportunity, so they kind of, I mean, I can't help but say, but they created this mess, right? So
themselves, absolutely, as governments typically do.
Right, and so now it's kind of on them to figure out a solution, and I don't know if California is any example. I don't think the game of whack-a-mole and fining and this and that is necessarily going to be a winning solution, but it doesn't mean they're not going to try.
Is NYC, in your opinion, the number one place for the black market, but up front with the storefronts and things like that? Or does Cali run in that world as well? Because anytime I've ever dealt with Cali, previous to legalization, was never in any sort of storefront. It was always on a farm in the middle of the mountains. What is that? Is New York unique to that proposition of having the illegal storefront?
No, not at all. It's interesting, but look, it's on a state by state enforcement basis, right? So I think Cali has almost the same number of unlicensed dispensaries as it does licensed dispensaries, if not 2-to-1, unlicensed to licensed. New York, the ratio is much worse, right? New York, you're in the tens of thousands of unlicensed shops to the 25 or so licensed shops. So, 10,000 to 25 is a pretty wild disparity.
Wow. That is such a huge number, though, man. Like, I don't know how one corrals it, right? Like, at this point, you're never going to hire the number of them. It's like the IRS, right? You're never going to hire enough people to cover what the problems are that exist. You're going to start cherry picking and finding ones that work for you. But I'm telling you, man, I'm struggling to think how I would want to get involved in a legal market like that. It just seems so dangerous to my long-term, ability, because they have none of the same expense. They have none of the same overhead, right? All the legal guys got to follow seed to sale regulations and the costs that come with all the auditing and the bullshit. But these guys just get to grow weed and sell it.
Yeah. And it's not, maybe it's not tested. I think there's going to be a degree to which the whether or not your product is tested will matter to more and more consumers, right?
I do think over time, we're gonna talk about it then. We've talked about it on the first two shows. Let's talk about it. Testing. More specifically, Aaron, mold testing. Where does Aaron fall on the conversation of mold? And then from that standpoint, a step further is the remediation that takes place afterwards. Does it affect flavor, composition, etc.? Aaron, tell me what you think.
I'll give you a quick breakdown. I mean, I think, look, it's hot button for a lot of folks, because there's folks that think that the more stringent the testing, the more exotic the pesticides and fungicides that people will use to successfully pass testing, right? But aren't actually tested for, right? Because they can only test for so many compounds. Personally, I've looked at enough labs and smoked enough corresponding samples that I could tell you when there's aspergillus or some of the really nasty things present, I feel like I notice it. I feel like I have a much more harsh throat the next day. It just feels like I'm fighting something a little bit. And even when the aerobic bacteria and yeast are really, really high, right? Which allegedly shouldn't hurt you because it's just like what's on plants. I don't know. Maybe it's psychological or psychosomatic rather, but I've seen enough corresponding tests and smoked the flower to feel like, okay, the higher that number is, the less I am feeling good afterwards in the next day, just like from a respiratory health perspective.
Yeah, for
Still
sure.
getting high, it's the same shit.
Right.
But yeah, and so I don't know. We in New York, because of the rules and regs being what they are, don't have to remediate unless it's got one of the 5 really bad molds or microbials present, right? But personally, we try to adhere, like my brand, we do adhere to the limits of the medical program, more or less. So it's around 100,000 max for I think for bacteria, and then 10,000 max for yeast. Now this gets to the second part of your question. So to get to that number, however, we will remediate, right? And any flower that requires it. And keep in mind, it doesn't all require it. Some stuff just comes in and it's like way low. Maybe they dipped it in hydrogen peroxide before they cured it, right? Which again, like has its all of this has its downsides.
Right. Yeah, I'm just old school, bro. I hack that thing off. I hang it upside down. I clean the roots, and then I pick it off. Like I don't, I keep it in a clean, dry area best I can, and we move on with our lives. Like we try not to overthink it. But that's a small, 100 plant grow. You guys are at scale of thousands. Some of the places Damien goes, the glass house shit is just miles of weed where I'm sure issues come up. But as Damien points out, though, there's good and bad as it becomes molds, yeast, bacteria. Right? So it's like everyone's like, oh, mold, and he goes, well, mold, maybe the right mold.
Yeah, there's probiotics, and that's what people don't realize. And some farmers use probiotics or proactively use certain bacteria or yeast to combat other things, right? To compete with bad stuff like powdery mildew or what have you, or maybe a pest. So it is interesting. The public is very squeamish about it. I think you have to realize that the stuff you buy at the grocery store is like loaded with.
It's everywhere you look, man. It's everywhere you look. I recently had I ran, my wife and I, my wife, she got ill, and we were trying to figure out what had happened, all these other things, and we ran a mold test in her blood, and they're like, oh my God, she has toxic mold. Oh my God. I'm like, hold on. From what? And they're like, well, it could be food. If she eats weed, if she eats nuts. I'm like, bro, that's my whole diet. Like, what are you talking about? And again, this idea that people are, I'm not trying to discount the idea of toxic mold syndrome. That's not what I'm doing. All I'm trying to say is that we might be taking it a step too far when we want to talk about how it's only in our weed or it's only in our this. It's everywhere. Yeah. And Dustin on a show, he said, Sean, I guarantee you, go test any room in your house right now, you'll find it. He goes, you'll find it. And it's not like it's going to end the world. So you're kind of like, you get why it's important, but you're not here to like make sure that everyone goes through the same sort of, rigorous remediation necessary if it's not all necessary.
No, it looks different states do it differently. And so we typically adhere to whatever the state says because we don't have licenses, right? So we just operate in licensed facilities with our partners. So it's kind of like their rules are our rules and their rules are the state's rules. So like in Cali, for example, it's a totally different test. And you don't find yourself really remediating very much for microbials in Cali. Oregon has been in flux because they created rules, then the farmers fought back, and now
we talked about that. And hey, I love that, right? I love the fact that the people doing the work are like, whoa, this is bullshit. This isn't how we do business. And that's how we got into the taste difference and the no difference and how things look and feel, and etc. But to your point, I know it. I know when it's right. I know when it's wrong. I know when it hurts the chest. I know when it doesn't. You can assume those things are connected and maybe I should stop, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's also, I don't want to say obvious, but you've been looking at enough weed. You crack it open, you can get a good idea if you got a problem or not, on the basic level of things without testing. So Aaron, do you think this is something that states will continue to look at? And let me ask you, is it a money grab for people in the remediation business? Therefore, states look at it as a joint venture together to make additional money against this plant since they see the upside already?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you conjure the specter of big remediation. But I think, look, those machines are hella expensive, and so it's a lot of money, and so there's definitely a vested interests, and there are lobbyists. So if you put all those things together, I wouldn't be surprised if folks aren't petitioning or using PR, right?
Yeah, I
To
mean, look, I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm
right,
not in the big remediation business, but the more I hear it, the more I become concerned that look at what
right.
people look at when they see our industry right now, Aaron. They're like, "Oh, go make money." Whether it's guys trying to lend at 30% plus, whether it's people trying to charge more taxes than is humanly possible, right?
Right.
All these different parts and pieces to me, I think it makes up some questionable decisions by a corporate / governmental entity. Yeah. I mean, and I don't trust big corporations to begin with. So that's my own problem.
Yeah, yeah, and I hear you. I mean, I think, look, it's interesting because there's people on all sides of it. There's buyers who, when they hear it, like a strain in the menu is remediated, recoil from that. There is buyers who gravitate towards that. It's just one of those weird hot button issues that hasn't been resolved, but at least it's based on some science versus like your indica sativa nomenclature, right? Which we
Yeah, or
apparently are
the
stuck
or the
with.
70% THC levels or whatever,
Yes,
right? You and I have talked about all that
right.
shit. Like if you see someone listed over 25, they're lying to you. All right.
Yeah,
So just walk away, know
yeah.
you're being lied to, feel better about it. But let me ask you, when you bring up the buyer and the recoil and the people who gravitate and go, is there a wholesale price difference once something has been remediated versus having not been?
No, and really, look, you're going to spend $150 per pound to remediate that material. There's really, in my mind, only like one or two good ways to do it, and then there's a lot of, like, I shouldn't say good. There's no good way to do it, but there's one or two ways that are least bad.
I mean,
And
I'm with you, dude. I used to have to bomb the room, right? When the spider mites came, it was like, look, I've got one tool. I know it'll work for sure. Yeah, all the insects I can put in there, sure, time-wise. But if I just ripped a cord on this room and I let this happen, I'm gonna get rid of everybody in a fellow swoop. I don't love it, but you got to look at it, right? So everyone has their ways of doing it, but you're right. I don't think there's any good way to do it. That's
no
for sure.
good way. But
No
yeah,
good.
that's that. I mean, look, I think the getting back to it, I think New York's in an interesting spot, though. I think the flower does keep getting better crop over crop. I get to see it from like the cultivators that we're in contract with, and year over year, or now, like for the greenhouse folks, batch over batch. Everything is looking better, smelling better, and testing better. In
That's
terms of
awesome. And you have been on the forefront of being able to see that, right? You work within that. And to your point, these states legalize this with no plan except for after legalization to give out permits to then fulfill a market, right? Where there's some very interesting going on right now in Minnesota. Minnesota, fully legal, no dispensaries, but it seems like they already made a deal with the American Indians to grow this ahead of time. And now people are being able to set foot on American Indian land and have dispensaries and purchase in the state of Minnesota, and everyone seems cool with it. Does that make sense to you that hey, before we give approval, shouldn't we have a plan to backfill, but we can't give permits until we give approval? Like, is there any way to fix that sort of, we go legal, now we need to wait 130 days before we have actual weed? I don't know, interstate. What's the answer, Aaron?
You are asking the wrong guy. I mean, look, I know how to operate within the rules and regs. I know that I have yet to see any state or territory's regs that I think are like great, where I like hold them up as the example. They're all so different. Keep in mind, like up in Canada, there's like a central buyer that is the government, right? Like the OCS. And like in Ontario, for example, and you're literally selling your weed to the government, who then sells it to the dispensary. So everyone has tried to make this more and complicated than maybe it needs to be, and everyone seems to be reinventing the wheel. I don't know what to say, man. It's so kooky, and then you compound that with, intoxicating cannabis, like hemp derivatives,
Right.
and that whole market. And it just seems to be like the whole experiment is in chaotic flux.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm in a non-legal state. Probably will be the last in the union if it had its choices for whatever dumb reason that exists there. But it's funny because we have people like friends of mine be like, "Oh man, I just went to a dispensary, so and so." I'm like, "No, you didn't." They're like, "Yeah, no, I did. I bought CBD." I'm like, "Okay, bro, you went there. You went to a CBD shop. You did not go to a dispensary." And it's because these people are starting to position themselves in these non-legal states as somewhere to come and get your weed, and it's just not. It's not true. It's not fair. And to your point, it continues to confuse the consumer, which I hate because that's who I'm in this for, right? I'm in it for patients. I'm in it for people who want to be a part of the plant. That makes it harder on everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what was the truck? There was what was it called? It wasn't called the weed truck in Times Square. That
Oh
was,
yeah,
remember that?
yeah, I do. I don't remember the name of it, but it was gigantic.
Yeah, hold on. I gotta Google it now. But yeah, it was that kooky weed truck, and then he had a fleet of them, in fact, because the state repoed them over
Yeah,
back
I
taxes.
remember you showing pictures of this dude like
Weed
parked
World.
out on Times Square and shit.
Weed World, that's what it was.
That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it.
And so just about fake, just apropos of your fake weed comment, like those guys literally sold like CBD lollipops as edibles to tourists for I think it was almost a decade, right? And just every single one, all you had to do was Google them and Reddit, and you would immediately know it was fake. And yet people walk up and buy it one after another. Just crazy. And now they operate, I don't know if it's still open, but they have like a bootleg weed store now.
Consumers are sheep, man, right? At the end of the day, they go where they know and they do what they do. And if someone tells them otherwise, maybe they listen, maybe they don't. Aaron, we've gotten into a lot of the history of where you stand on a lot of topics, but I like to turn over the rest of the show to people to talk about passion, to talk about what's important to them right now. So, Aaron, what is it that people need to hear about, or what is it that you want to speak about right now as it relates to the space in general?
As it relates to the space in general, yeah, I guess I'll share that this project I've been working on for a really, really long time. It's kind of crazy to work on something this long and not have it be like a real thing yet. But I've had an app in development for years now, it feels like, and with my partner Nadir Pearson and my other partner Chad Spector. And I'm stoked because this app is like everything I've always wanted as a brand operator in the space, to just put my brand out there, connect with consumers, like have our content in a censorship-free space where we can naturally like tag our products, people can engage. There's no kind of like using asterisks to block out cannabis, none of that nonsense, because it is legal where I am, and it's legal where many people are, and it, as a content form, should be legal everywhere because of the First Amendment. So I think really like it's kind of interesting to me that Instagram and Facebook and some of these other platforms have gotten away with this for so long. But the passion for me is this new project that's going to really give a new space for cannabis culture and curation and commerce. So
Yeah,
it's called Hybrid.
Yep.
I'm just flicking through some of it right now for y'all. Sean, you've checked it out before. It's really grown a lot since you checked it out.
I know I was the pain in the ass Android guy. You guys were fully developed in the Mac suite, and I said, "Hey, got an Android," and everyone's like shook their heads like, "Not this fucking guy and his Google phone," But I'll tell you, I loved it. I shared it with some people, and they love it. There were a couple people I think even were trying to purchase at the time. You'd had a glass company on there that was making these really cool pieces, right? My buddy was like, "Dude, this is dope. I want to buy this." can't buy whatever. So he went, whatever it was, had to go around the app to it. But I've watched you work on this for a while. And I know a part of this for you is because of the censorship, because of the shadow bans, because of the bullshit that takes place here. So Aaron, I think I've maybe asked you this in private, but I have to ask you publicly now that we're talking about it. In the app, it's taken a long time to develop, right? What if the day comes where IG and FB decide they're cool?
Yeah.
That they're going to let this roll. What then for hybrid? How do you feel it fits? What do you feel it does? Do you feel like, hey, it's still just social for weed only, so that's the reason to be here? Because that's my feeling, because it isn't about politics and bullshit and nonsense. It's about the culture and the people in it. So is that something you've thought through? I imagine it is.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, keep in mind, even now, the feature set goes way beyond your Facebook or Instagram experience, right? So you've got familiar UX in the sense that there are feeds, there are calendars, right? So for cannabis events, cannabis drops, you name it. But even now in this beta version that's launching on the Apple Store, right? On the App Store, there's nested products. You look at a product, there's nested consumer posted reviews about that product. You can see what dispensaries it's at and how near to you they are. You could see if a user is a bud tender at a certain dispensary.
What are you getting, a little weed map integration here? You're trying to do it all in one place? Is that what we're doing? Are we using APIs? Or are we doing it ourselves?
So some of it's API driven, certainly for some of the big data or the live data. But at the end of the day, the feature set, the app is all, it's all our own. And all of which is to say, even now, I feel like it's this whole different experience that's totally built around cannabis culture and consumption, and elevating that. So that I think you look a year from now, 2 years from now, when these dinosaurs get around to just accepting that, oh, this is not a thing anymore, right? The war on drugs is over and drugs won. So
they've been winning, people. I don't know. You've been on the wrong side of the argument for north of 70 fucking years at this point. So
right,
just find a new path.
By then, this app experience is going to be so different and so advanced, and the consumer and users and community will have kind of crafted it with us into something I think that'll be totally unique. So I'm not overly concerned.
All right, good. Because I always think of big business trying to crush small business. You know what I mean? That's why I said to you, I don't like corporations. I don't like them for a lot of different reasons. But what I like about the hybrid app is it felt specific. It felt like it belonged to a culture of people that designed it, that worked for it, right? And it's there for us to use and to connect with people, right? And that's really what I dug about it during. And again, dude, it's probably been a year since I've even looked at the beta. By all means, send it over, send the invite. I'll get on it. You know what I mean? I want to share it with people. This episode is going to be airing December the 20th. Aaron, when will the app be live? Before or after?
I'm going to go out on a limb and say before.
All right. He's going to say before. So if you're watching this now, it should be available to you. If it's not, DM me and we'll get to Aaron and we'll find out what the fuck is actually going on here.
Right.
But at the end of the day, Aaron, for your hopes and dreams, what is this going to do for the industry as you hope it? Like, what do you hope that it accomplishes that maybe doesn't exist today or is going to do better than what exists today?
Absolutely. Look, I think just having a eventually, fully shoppable, curated content experience, for me as a brand, like we can do so much on the content side of things. My partner Eduardo is like a wizard at that, right? And he's very much the soul of the brand.
He very much is.
I can't tell you how many times our Instagram account has been shut down, and then it feels like we've lost quite a bit in terms of our connection to our authentic community that we've built. You multiply that times every brand in the industry, right? And you see the kind of scope of the problem that needs to be solved. It's just there's this continued fracturing, fighting of cannabis normalization, mainstreamization. You have what have you. So I think this could be the app that kind of glues everybody together, but we of course need to kind of get everyone onto it first.
We do. It is the glue, in my opinion. That's what I'm really looking forward to. That's kind of we had, like I said, we had Dustin on here talking about Fat Nugs magazine, sort of what people are trying to do inside of this in these different spaces, right? We're going back to paper publications to try and get our points across, right? Because digitally we've been hindered a little bit. Now, these are something more to me. This is I call him the Hugh Hefner of weed, because this is like Playboy. We all had buddies, dads who collected them, were curated, by year and in plastic and shit like baseball cards. This could be where we're headed in this space. But if I took this and I put it into hybrid, right, where people could buy the Drop magazine, I think while we're getting ready to record this episode, they drop every other quarter, I think. And so that would be cool for people to know, like, hey, another avenue, people to hear about it. When you look at the app, can you talk to me, just business guy to business guy, about your perspective on the monetization of it? You're not the Red Cross, bro. So you're here to make money. What are the hopes of that? Because I deal in the digital marketing space as a living, right, as a career. And I see kind of the dirty nastiness of what goes on there. What is your hope there? And what would you want people to know about how you're looking to monetize this app? If you can share it, if I've stepped over the line, let me know. But that's what strikes me from business guy to business guy.
No, it doesn't step over the line at all. And you're right. I mean, I think, look, it's easy to forget, and a lot of startup founders often do, but like, you are in the business of making money. If you are in business, like, you do have to keep the lights on. You do have to pay yourselves eventually, right? Yeah. Like, you can only live on ramen for so long. And so I think for this particular one, like, this app for me can be doing users a big service and making money. And I think even right now, the lowest hanging fruit is, you imagine an app that is very finely tuned to what you like for cannabis products, strains, you name it. It's not a big leap for that app, which has all this wealth of cool content with products and strains associated with them, right, to then make recommendations to you, like, oh, such and such dispensary nearby has this product, we actually think you'll like it, and guess what, it's on sale. Obviously I want to be able to turn that alert off, but I'm not mad about that. As a user, right? Like, I'm like, oh, that's kind of like how regular marketing works for regular people. And if I'm already on this kind of drops centric app, I'm already kind of window shopping.
Truth. So then the partnerships become with the brands that are into the actual app themselves. Is that where, from your end of the deal, it's not about a consumer facing charge as it is a brand awareness and a brand charge to you? This is not an app where the user is going to be fronted with that cost, like an X, for instance?
No, I don't think so, because I don't really think in any of our revenue conversations we've discussed that. I mean, we've certainly talked about loyalty, points. We've certainly talked about just like how to reward bud tenders more for what they do and make their audience a little more of like a permanent piece of their offering to their current employer and other employers. So we've thought a lot about that. But we never really thought about monetizing those transactions, whether with the consumer, with the bud tender. It's really more around, how can users' preferences in cannabis, how can we intelligently and, in a respectful, classy way, tee up cool products that we actually think people would like. Which
I love that. And I love the idea of highlighting the bud tenders. I think of them as salesmen, right? I grew up a salesman my whole life, and they're at the forefront of it, right? So as salesmen, we used to get spiffs, right? Move product, do this, do that, whatever it is. I think it would be super cool for those people to have a place to be highlighted, right? Because now you are sort of integrating the idea of the big, the big commerce side of it. And then you're also bringing in the personality side of it. You're allowing people to coexist in a space that they wouldn't already have done that, right? Because on IG, they're going to have a business page. Bud tender's not likely to have a bud tender page, but maybe on hybrid, it's a bud tender community that exists now, and they can speak. And, we just put on our first big event ever in the automotive space that we did ourselves. And the coolest part for me was listening to all the people we brought together talk with each other. be all about, oh, this hassle, that hassle, this is cool, that, have you tried this? That's what this is about. That's how I view hybrid as an industry connector. That's what I'm excited to see.
Yeah, preach. I mean, no, that's it. I mean, I think really there's a lot to be done, and there's no one really, it feels like, doing it in this particular way. So we're pretty excited to have the opportunity to, put something out there we think everyone's going to really like. And selfishly, like, yeah, I've been wanting to promote Lobo on something like this forever, and now it'll exist.
That's it. You get a chance to promote Lobo, which again is going to be everywhere by the time it's all said and done. Aaron, you have been unbelievable with your time, man. I want to thank you so much for doing it. And again, if there's anything I can do in the future, please let us know. Promote the brand, promote the app. We are here for it, man. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Catch you next time.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, it is our duty to do our best to elevate this plant to its rightful place in society. And this show is going to be on the forefront of doing that, bringing you all the major voices. So if you see someone you like, reach out to them. If you don't see someone on this show you think should be on this show, reach out to me and I'll be sure they get on this show. Thank you guys so much. Join us again next week. We got more great guests, more wonderful cannabis conversations.